Hey guys, back again here. We're going to dive into part two of the Nazi state lecture here. If you haven't watched part one yet, that is day 9. I highly encourage you to go check that out real quick. There's a couple of quick announcements, then I'll dive into that information. If you don't get to that information, then you're not going to quite understand this information. So make sure that you do that before you dive into, before you get into this one a little bit more. So I'm going to stop you right there. Okay, let's keep going here. So we're going to go ahead and get into part two, the state, where we actually see the beginning of the Nazi state and how they start to assert their order, specifically over the Jews, is what we're going to be diving into specifically. There are many different other aspects of the Nazi state that we could look at, but the best way to understand the true volatile, disgusting action is through the idea of looking at the Nuremberg laws, looking at Jewish resistance, looking at Jewish immigration, looking at what the Jews did at the time when Hitler finally basically took over and started the Third Reich. What did the Jews do? And this is super, super interesting to me. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into it here. So after I want to give you a quick timeline background, right? After January 30th, 1933, when Hitler was elected into office, and until May 1st of the same year, 1.6 million people were new members to the Nazi Party. It's not just renewing members. It's not just the NRA where you just keep accumulating members and they have lifetime memberships. It's not what it is. These are 1.6 new Nazi Party members that were joining the party. And this is interesting, right? And hardcore Nazi leaders shared Hitler's version of Nazism as this spiritual crusade in this way. They believed that Hitler's idea of Germany was a way to save Germany from itself. And this is where we see the concept of the Volksgemeinschaft really coming together. Hitler, Cooper. It's my dog. He wants to create this Volksgemeinschaft, create a national community that would overcome human issues of politics and society, that would create this more pure Aryan race of people. And what they did is they spun it around enough to where the ideals were dedicated to Hitler specifically through the use of personal vows, right? We looked at that in the last lecture. Personal vows to Hitler, dedication specifically to Hitler as an embodiment of the Volks mission, the people's mission. But here's something interesting to me that I like to look at here. And this is a paradox to me. It's a historical paradox, right? How can you create a national community? How can you create a people's community while also giving power to a single leader? How can you do that? How can you say this is for everybody, but we're only going to follow one person to get it? To me, that does not make sense. Maybe it's because I'm an American. I don't understand. So if you do have an understanding of that, please feel free to talk to me and let me know. And the question that then comes about with that as a follow-up is, should the party dominate the state, or should the state dominate the party? And this is where it's interesting, where literally the Nazi Germany, the Third Reich, had no idea of this. And Nazi leaders debated this so much. Should the party dominate the state, or should the state dominate the party, right? Overwhelmingly, it is the former of the party dominating the state, but it's interesting to see how those lines really start to get confusing, and this causes a lot of issues with Nazi leadership. Excuse me. Now we look at the Nuremberg laws, the beginning of the Nuremberg laws, and the first anti-Jewish policy began on April 1st, 1933. Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. Whew. April 1st, 1933. Happy April Fool's Day in 1933, I guess. And this began, it kind of was an April Fool's, I guess, if you want to call it ironically, now that I come to think of it. It was a boycott of Jewish businesses. This was the first anti-Jewish policy. Here's what's interesting though about this. Most Germans, the boycott of Jewish businesses occurred. Many Jewish business owners were shop owners. They were tailors. They were lower middle class style jobs, lower middle class businesses, groceries, stuff like that. There was a boycott during this time, which means that you shouldn't. There was an advocacy to not shop there, to not be there. SA officers, excuse me, SA officers were stationed in front of these businesses to discourage patronage of those Jewish businesses. However, most of the Germans totally ignored the SA officers, walked past them, and continued to shop at their stores, even though they were Nazi Party members, which is interesting. And the boycott of these Jewish businesses was canceled within 2 days. They knew that it was not effective, basically, because they really can't tell people to not shop there. They knew that. If they did that, then it would cause an uproar. And many of these Jewish businesses, most of these German citizens have been shopping there for years. They were right across the corner of them. They were practically their neighbors. And so this idea of a boycott of Jewish businesses was a total flop at the start. And this is where it's super interesting to see that. Now, there were subsequent laws, there were more subsequent laws that followed this boycott that was canceled, that flopped, to exclude non-Aryans, is what they referred to them, from places of civil service, serving in the military, serving in government positions, serving in medical professions, serving in teaching positions, serving in legal professions, serving in cultural or entertainment positions, being an actor, an actress, or serving in the press as editors or as writers or journalists. They were excluded. Non-Aryans were excluded. Now, this brings about an interesting aspect here, right? Is what is a non-Aryan? And I find this interesting. And this is where the Nuremberg laws actually starts to come in and become more prominent, right? Non-Aryans were defined as persons with one or more Jewish grandparents. Basically, if your grandparents were Jewish, or your parents were even Jewish, then you are considered a non-Aryan. Now, most people were considered non-Aryans because they could not prove their Aryan descent through birth certificates and marriage certificates, which is super interesting, right? Every citizen was required to prove their Aryan descent through those birth certificates and through marriage certificates, that their grandparents or their parents were not Jewish. This is super interesting, right? Because this brings about an aspect of, okay, well, what happens if you have a set of grandparents, right? Let's just say my mother was from Jewish descent and my father was an Aryan Christian. His grandparents go back as Aryan Christians. My mother is a non-practicing Jew, but her parents, my grandparents, were Jewish. Would that make me a non-Aryan? Because technically my grandparents had blood, but she married into a non-Aryan, right? Or she married into an Aryan bloodline. So therefore, I am a mixture of both. I want you to keep that in mind for the future here. Okay. Now, furthermore, these Nuremberg laws also limited non-Aryan schooling to only 1.5% of the total number of students who attended the school or university, right? So out of a school of 10,000 people that attended that university or secondary school, only 1,500 of those 10,000 people were permitted to be of non-Aryan descent. That is very, very slim, very small, right? A very small minority was attending school at that time. And even then, they still would be discriminated against and told to drop out. Anyways, and often, sometimes their tuition would be higher, other issues that were going on there. Here's what gets more interesting. Hitler agreed to make exceptions for Jews who served in World War I from these laws. They were considered, Jews who served in World War I were considered to be Aryans of the purest race. Now, hang on a second here. Wait. So you're going to make an exception for someone who served in the military, but you're not for anybody else. But because they serve their country, you're allowing that. But you're not going to allow non-Aryans to serve. It's super interesting, and the hypocrisy that really is occurring today this time is absolutely nuts. And you're going to find this is going to get worse here. Okay. Now, also wants you to keep in mind here of the number of Jews that were living there, right? Out of the 10,000, I said, of who can attend, only 1.5%, so 1,500 people could attend there, right? In 1933, over 500,000 Jews lived in Germany, which made up 1% of the population at the time. Only 1% of the population. Very, very minor. It was not a huge population of people. However, here's where it's interesting. 70% of those 500,000 people lived in large cities such as Berlin. And 30% of those 70%, right, who were living in large cities such as Vienna, Berlin, what was I thinking, along the Rhine River, other areas, 30% of them, of that 70%, lived in Berlin alone, where Hitler was at, right? So there was a massive Jewish population in Nazi Germany's capital at the time, right? A massive population, 30% of them living there out of the 70% who lived in larger cities. 1935, gotta skip you over here. 1935 is when they decided to begin to ramp up the anti-Semitism. And how they did this was through acts of terrorism, basically. And outright boycotts that actually started to begin in March of 1935. Jews were forbidden to enter into cinemas, theaters, pools, resorts. Any sort of Jewish newspaper that was being published was suspended. Any sort of propaganda against Nazi Germany was suspended, right? What they wanted to do was socially isolate the Jews from public society. And when we look at the concept of genocide, which genocide was not a word known at the time of Hitler and Nazi Germany, we look at what we call the social death of the victim. And this is a special note on genocide. Raphael Lemkin actually had coined the term genocide or massive killing, right? Genocide was not a word that was known then at all. The genocide never would have been told. And when he says this, there is a fundamentally staged step, and I took a class over comparative genocide. There's a certain amount of steps that goes through in terms of how genocide actually works. And we can attest it to all kinds of other genocides that have occurred. Not just the Holocaust, but also the Cambodian genocide, the Rwandan genocide. We can look at Japanese internment camps and almost their point of genocide, where we can see this actually occurring. We also can see this in the Native American term too, where we see Native American genocide that occurred in the United States even, right? This is where we see this happening. And this is where we begin to see the second stage of the concept of the Holocaust actually occurring. Okay, this is where we're entering into this exercise. The first stage was to dehumanize the victim, right? We've seen that in propaganda pictures. We've seen them in posters, right? Where Jews are considered separate from Aryan society, right? They're dehumanized. They were considered to be, at some point in time, we talked to them about how Jews were considered to be parasites, right? Viruses, victims. They are disgusting things, right? That should be, that are worthless in the world, right? They are dehumanized. They are not considered human beings anymore. They are divided racially. They're divided religiously. They're divided politically. And then they're starting to become socially isolated, socially divided, right? And this is where we create their social death, right? We forbid them to be in society completely. because they are so disgusting. They are such insects. They're such parasites, right? We've heard all of this stuff of these dehumanizing, disgusting things, right? You create their social death. Then on the next point is you separate them completely from society. And we'll talk about that later with the beginning of the Einsatzgruppen, and we will see how Jews are being immigrated, forcibly immigrated, completely separated from German society in the Aryan, the concept of Aryan race. And we see them being completely separated. And then you go to the fourth stage, which is the idea of extermination then happening. And this is where we will start off at the beginning of the Holocaust. So I want you to keep those four stages in mind and always question yourself when we're talking about anti-Semitism, when we're talking about Jews in Nazi Germany, where we are at on this this stage of genocide. And it's extremely important to understand that too. So the Nuremberg laws, right? Hitler then officially announces the official Nuremberg law decrees in September of 1935, right? The Nuremberg laws, the Nuremberg rallies actually occurred during this time. He defines the non-Aryan, right? We talked about the definition of non-Aryan, but we also know their translation as Mischlinge, which is German translation for meaning of mixed blood. And it had a negative connotation with it, right? Remember when I was talking about how my father would have been an Aryan and my mother would have been a Jew, right? This is kind of interesting, right? Mixed blood is considered non-Aryan, right? So then, therefore, I would be considered non-Aryan in that case, right? There would be a very negative connotation if you were a Mischlinge. You were considered to be a mongrel, a mutt, or a half-breed, right? If you read Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, right? If you're half-blood, it was a very negative connotation. You were kind of excluded from the rest of society. You were kind of an outcast, right? This is where it really is being shown, right? A Mischlinge, and you will hear that word throughout other speeches during this time, okay? And with the Nuremberg laws, there was issues that came about with it, right? And I already talked to you a little bit about it. If you were a half-blood, then what is it like this? What if you were, there were so many different factors that played into this because it was such an irrational thing to believe in from the start, right? So he focuses on issues of marriage. And this is the Nuremberg law as it stands. A Jew cannot marry an Aryan German citizen who is no longer accepted in society as if it weren't accepted before. This forbid any sort of relation between Jews and any subjects of German or kindred blood, which is kind of interesting. So basically, they're saying that a Jew is not allowed to marry, but anybody else can get married. Kindred blood can be married, but Jews cannot. So this is it's a politically correct way of saying we are not allowing you to interbreed, allowing you to be accepted in society, and we're not allowing you to have love and to date anymore, right? We really want you to suffer and be in this formidable form of ugliness, essentially is what it comes down to. Now, marriages committed between Jews and Aryans became increasingly difficult during this time, right? Again, if it were my father and mother, my father was an Aryan and my mother was a Jew, this was a difficult situation that I was in as their son, right? Because children of them were even more difficult to declassify as an Aryan or a Jew, right? If I had a darker complected skin, I would be considered more Jewish. And I would be considered a non-Aryan. If I had lighter complected skin, I would probably be considered more Aryan. So it was really taken on a case-by-case basis, which becomes increasingly difficult, right? Because the Nazis really could not pin down specifically what defined a non-Aryan and what defined an Aryan during this time. And it made it even more crazy, right? Education aspects, again, we already talked about only 1.5% here in 1933, 1934, right? Well, in terms of when the Nuremberg laws would come out in September 1935, Jews could not study, period. They were excluded from studying in secondary schools or university, right? And in any service to the state, they were unallowed to serve. They could not serve in any service of the state or any public office or any sort of position. They were unable to fly the Reich and national flag, which I don't know why you would anyway as a Jew. You're already having all your civil liberties taken away anyways, but that's how it was. What? Cooper, y'all. And Jews were forbidden to hire Aryan women under the age of 45 years old. Interesting, right? This speaks volumes to women's rights. This is where you're going to see from the Nuremberg laws, if you're looking at women's rights in the Third Reich from that aspect, you're really seeing how women's rights are slowly being taken away. And we're going to talk more about that later. It gets crazier than this, okay? Jews were forbidden then to hire Aryan women under the age of 45 years old. Why would you do that, right? Well, it would create a conflict of interest between a Jew hiring an Aryan woman under the age of 45 years old. And the age 45 is significant because that's about the time where you are not allowed, or you cannot physically interbreed. And this is their justification of that specifically, right? So it's disgusting. It gets worse, okay? But here's what's interesting. Overall, what this did is it effectively separated Jews from Germans politically, legally, and socially. It separated them, segregated them, got rid of it. And what this was, it was a natural extension of Hitler's ideas of generating a more perfect Aryan race. Again, we're going back to the social Darwinism scale, the racial, despicable aspect of this idea of creating a more pure Aryan race. There's more to this, though. And Hitler openly hinted at another step of this in the Nuremberg laws, and we should have, as the United States was spying on Germans at the time, we should have caught on to this earlier, right? And I'm not putting out a conspiracy theory or anything like that. We're not asking that what if questions, right? A counterfactual history. But reading that quote right down there in orange, you can see an attempt to regulate. This is one of his speeches in the Nuremberg rallies. An attempt to regulate by law a problem that, in the event of repeated failure, would have to be transferred by law to the National Socialist Party for final solution. Final solution. We're going to talk more about this later, the final solution of the Jew. And how it's an ugly matter. How the members of the Nazi Party, Hitler specifically, but other members of the Nazi Party, never outright said that they are going to exterminate the Jewish population because they were afraid, in terms of political correctness, of what would actually happen. They never outright condemned the Jews and said that they were going to exterminate them. They were going to have a final solution for the Jews. We were going to handle the mislynches, right? We were going to handle the issues, right? This is where you really see the dehumanization occurring, to where you can't even use them by name. You can't even default your actions or say your action out loud for the sake of your political career alone. And this is where political correctness then starts to develop, and it really takes off and becomes even more uglier as it goes. So then we look at the Jewish response, right? So what happened with the Jews during this time, right? Why didn't they just all leave, right? This was the question. I mean, this is a simple question. Why didn't just all the Jews pack up and leave the country? Well, it's not that simple, right? I can't just say, oh, well, I don't agree with the president that is current in office, so I'm just going to escape to Canada. It's not that simple. People believe it to be that simple, but it's not. It's not easy to pick up your life and literally go somewhere else after you've been in there for generations upon generations, and you fought and clawed so hard over that period of time to establish yourself in that society that you're in, right? So the Jewish response, right? There's two different ways that we've seen how it happened. There was notable increases in suicide from Jews from 1933 to 1935. But there also was this very stubborn will to resist Nazi Germany and what it did. right? And they believed that there was this right for these Jews to live in Germany because of their identity as being German Jews, as being German people and practicing Jewish religion, right? They established a distinction between those two. However, people who were outside of the German Jewish population did not understand that at all. And so this continual condemnation of that occurred during that time. And when we talk about wearing the Jewish badge, the Star of David there, as you can see in yellow on the side there, as most of you probably have seen before, right before the time of the Holocaust, as a form of identity, many of the Jews did not wear these yellow badges. And propaganda says, in various newspapers, prints, and stuff like that, posters, to encourage Jewish heritage, they said, wear the yellow badge with pride, right? If you're going to be religiously, if you're going to be a German Jew, you should be allowed to wear that yellow badge with pride. And this is what convinced the Jews, over increasing pressure, again, repeating these ideas until they become truths. This is what convinced the Jews to do it, right? This is what convinced them to do it. If you repeat yourself constantly, if you say the same thing over and over again, eventually you're going to get sick of it and you're going to accept it, right? That's how it happened during this time, right? So the resistance of wearing the yellow badge increasingly became unpopular, and finally many of the Jews started to give up. And you will see notable increases then in suicide rates, more stubborn will to resist, and this is where you see more problems occurring during this time. Now, a great question Caleb McGuire had, and he brought this in. He says, well, why didn't they just immigrate, right? Why didn't they just leave? And I think this is extremely important. 1933 is when we see this huge rush to immigrate, right? To leave the country. Immigration is leaving, immigration is coming to, right? So immigration is coming to, immigration is to leave from, right? So the Jewish immigration really started in 1933, right? A rush to immigrate from Germany because of Adolf Hitler's popularity and him being appointed as chancellor as a far right. Remember, the Jews knew that they were going to be persecuted in some way, shape, or form. So there was this huge rush to immigrate, and you see the number there, 37,000 people immigrated from Germany at the time. 1934, the next year, we saw this dramatic decrease, right? This dramatic decrease during this time, 37,000 to 23,000. Many of the people that had left already had left, and they were not planning on coming back. And the people who wanted to stay, that's how it goes. Okay. 1934 and 1935, you see an increasing, another 2,000 that left, or that 2,000 less than even the prior year, because of more signs of peace going on between that time. However, in 1935, when you see the Nuremberg laws come about, in between 1935 and 1936, you see an increase in Jewish immigration because of the Nuremberg laws by about 4,000 people. In 1937, you see the Olympics that were held in Berlin, Germany. Nazi Germany, yes, actually held the Olympics, which is interesting, right? Totalitarian governments doing Olympic competition, right? You see a decrease during this time because the Nazis had taken down propaganda posters in preparation for the Olympics because they didn't want the concept of Jewish extermination being on the table to ruin their economic state during this time. So Hitler demanded that much of the propaganda and anti-Semitism against the Jews should be put down for at least until the Olympics were through in 1937. So that's kind of interesting to see too. Now, in terms of Jewish immigration, right? Where are you going to go? If I am a Jew and I am trying to escape Germany, where am I going to go? Probably the most politically free other countries that are out there, right? Because I'm tired of the political persecution. I want to find a place of opportunity, right? Well, there are three countries that were really accepting of this. The United States, Great Britain, and France welcomed German Jews. However, they were welcomed on a very limited visa basis. Okay. And what happened during this time is League of Nations refused to alter any immigration quotas or policies to permit more German Jews from entering. And this was a situation that the Nazis took advantage of. And because of this idea, they were not humanitarian refugees, right? They were not religious persecution refugees, but they were political refugees because they are being socially outcasted by political means. They're not being outcasted as a humanitarian issue. So therefore, that's why the US, Great Britain, and France all wanted to halt their immigration quotas and leave them the same, right? Because these massive influxes of people could not happen. These were considered political refugees at the time. And here's what's interesting to see too, right? The Nazis capitalized on this idea of not permitting any more Germans. Now they're going to consider the Nazis are going to consider their German Jews as Germans. Now you're not going to allow Germans into other countries. Why not? Well, could there be a wolf amongst the sheep, right? Could there be a Nazi member amongst the sheep that could cause terrorism in another country? So this is where the United States, Great Britain, and France are all thinking of too, right? So they want to keep this. And this is a Nazi member, a quote that he says at a rally in Berlin. Okay. We are saying openly that we do not want the Jews, while the democracies keep on claiming that we are willing to receive them, and then leave the guests out in the cold. Aren't we savages, better men after all? Right. So there's this idea of, okay, well, we're accepting the German Jews, right? We're leaving them in our country. We're allowing them to stay here. We're not just forcibly exterminating them. But the interesting aspect of that is they are exterminating them, right? And that's why they're emigrating. That's why they're leaving. So this is a super interesting thing, and the Nazis capitalize on this specifically. And it really kind of plays to this idea of creating more German nationalism, German sentiment for the Volksgemeinschaft, or the national community, right? Because they're being more accepting of the religions of German Jews, right? So this is very, very interesting to see, and that's how it goes. Now, don't just think that anti-Semitism as well. I didn't really talk about this in class, but don't just think that anti-Semitism was a thing just in Germany. It was also in other countries. The United States was somewhat anti-Semitic, right? Even to this day, there are people who are very anti-Semitism because of the idea of the Jews' practices, right? We've talked about this in previous lectures. So I want you to keep that in mind as well. Then we begin to see the deterioration that's occurring in Germany, right? We start to see issues of censorship of the Jewish press. We start to see the ability of the SA and the Gestapo surveillance of people, of places, of neighborhoods. We start to see the SA and the SS harassing German Jews. We're starting to see harassment of political opponents even still occurring, or people who may have somehow miraculously spoken out against Nazi Germany. There was also an issue of economic need for stability in Jewish communities, right? With the boycott of businesses, it severely hurt Jewish businesses. And they needed economic stability during this time, right? So more people are immigrating because of that reason too. And then we see an issue of an increasing push for forced immigration of Jews from Germany. Basically, the Nazi leadership said, we want you out. You need to leave before things start to get ugly. And here is where we will leave off, is we will look at the Kristallnacht program. I do not have my book with me. I left it at school, and of course it's an e-learning day for the third day in a row, so I will not be able to read those 2 pages to you, but if you come and see me before Friday, I will get those to you. So it's pretty cool like that. Last but not least, we are looking at quiz number 4. I have that with me, and you will be able to take that in person with me, and I would encourage you to do that. Before we leave today, I have to tell you something real quick. I am finalizing midterm grades. You will have 0.5 credits put in by February 10th. Excuse me, not February 10th, my bad. February 19th is what I meant to say. This Friday at 3 p.m., February 19th. There's no seminars this week because it's a catch-up week, and it's also there's issues with iStep going on as well. So I am putting midterm grades in on Friday, which means that all of your quizzes and assignments must be in by 3 p.m. on Friday, including this lecture. Okay, so I highly encourage you review your stuff. Make sure you come in and see me before Friday to take your quizzes to get those all done by 3 p.m. Anything that I don't have turned in, any notebook checks I haven't seen yet, any quizzes that you have not taken, they will have to be put in as zeros because we have to start moving on from this. Again, you are welcome to retake any quizzes as you would like to get perfect scores on as many times as you want, as long as you take them the first time they're given. So this is what I really, really welcome you to do. Okay. So that's how that's going to work. I'm going to leave you off on that. I encourage you here for day 11 from February 12th, which would be last Friday. We watched World War II in color, which was season 1, episode 2, entitled Lightning War. I need to fix that on my syllabus here. I encourage you to watch that. It is kind of fascinating. If you're not into documentaries, it might be a little boring, but I really encourage you to watch the first 15 minutes of it, where Germany begins to invade Poland. Now, this will also count as one of your 2 to 3 page papers if you wanted to do that for Friday, and we'll talk about that too, if you're willing to do that. And that would be due technically on the 19th, but I'm going to extend that out a week. So this will be due, when would it be due? The 26th, the end of February 26th. So we'll look into that there for you. Okay. Monday, the 22nd, I might wait a day or two before that. It might be Tuesday. We'll be looking at Nazi Germany at war. That is not an e-learning day. We just got that deleted. So I will probably be doing a lecture over that. I'm not really sure though. Might try to find some readings to do for you guys because we really haven't had a whole lot of reading stuff going on. So I encourage you to do that. I think that's all for announcements and what's going on. I will keep you in the loop on what's going on as much as possible. Again, I do apologize that this took almost a week to get done and put in. I've been sidetracked by a bunch of things, and with having e-learning days and constantly being off, I've been pretty unmotivated. As you can see, the scruffle on the side of or all over my face here. So that's how that'll work. But I welcome you. Make sure that you have everything all done and ready to go by Friday, February 19th, because all the quizzes and assignments will be taken into context, and you will get a half a credit ad hoc in place of the multiple weeks that we already have. So it'll make it a lot easier for me to be able to see who's got stuff in it and who doesn't. So hopefully that makes more sense. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day. I look forward to seeing you guys soon at some point in time. If not, enjoy yourselves.